They entered the Appalachian Mountains together, and for the first few days, everything unfolded exactly as planned. They were experienced hikers, not reckless, not chasing extremes. Just a couple who preferred distance over destinations. Their route cut through one of the quieter sections of the range, where trails folded into one another, and cell service faded early. They signed in at the ranger station, exchanged small talk about weather and leaf cover, and disappeared into green that felt endless rather than empty. They were supposed to exit 5 days later. Only one of them did. Search and rescue first noticed something was wrong when the exit time passed without contact. No emergency signal. No check-in, just absence. The trail log showed their names written side by side, the handwriting relaxed, unhurried. When search teams began retracing the route, they expected something familiar. An injury, a navigational error, a storm-driven delay. Appalachia was old terrain, forgiving in some ways, deceptive in others. People underestimated it because it didn't look dramatic. The first sign they found didn't look like trouble at all. A campsite, neatly packed, fire pit cold, tent folded not torn. 2 sleeping bags rolled and strapped. Food containers sealed. Nothing scattered. Nothing abandoned in haste. It looked like a place someone had left intentionally, believing they were coming back. Further down the trail, they found footprints. 2 sets at first, then 1. The single trail continued for nearly a mile, before it ended near a stand of hemlock trees, where the ground dropped subtly, not into a cliff, but into something darker. A shallow ravine where light thinned, and sound behaved strangely. There were no signs of a fall, no broken branches, no disturbed earth. Just 1 set of prints stopping, and no second set leaving. Hours later, near dusk, a ranger spotted movement further downslope. A woman, barely moving. She was standing upright but unresponsive, facing the trees, her pack still on her shoulders, hands hanging loosely at her sides. When they called out, she didn't turn. When they touched her arm, she flinched. Not away, but inward, as if pulling back from something only she could see. She didn't ask about him. She didn't say his name. She didn't say anything at all. They led her out as night fell, her steps steady, automatic, guided rather than chosen. She followed instructions without resistance, without comprehension. At the ranger station, she sat where they placed her and stared at the wall, as if it were still the forest. When asked where her partner was, she blinked once, her mouth opened, then closed. No sound came out, not fear, not grief, silence. And somewhere deep in the Appalachian Mountains, whatever had separated them remained. Unseen, unnamed, and very old. They kept her overnight under observation. Not because she was injured. Physically, she was fine. But because no one could tell what state she was actually in. She drank water when it was offered. Ate when prompted. Slept when exhaustion finally overtook whatever tension had been holding her upright. But when she woke, the silence remained. Doctors checked for head trauma, shock, dehydration, exposure. Nothing explained the way. She avoided certain questions with her eyes rather than her words. When asked directly about her partner, her gaze slid sideways, unfocused, as if the concept itself had no clear edges anymore. Search teams went back out at first light. They followed the trail again, slower this time, measuring the ground instead of scanning it. The place where the second set of footprints disappeared didn't make sense under closer inspection. There was no slope steep enough to erase tracks. No stream crossing to wash them away. The soil held impressions well. It should have remembered him. It didn't. Dogs were brought in. They picked up his scent easily at the campsite, then hesitated at the ravine. Some refused to descend. Others circled the same patch of ground repeatedly, whining, pulling back toward their handlers, as if the air itself had changed texture. One handler later said, "It felt like the dogs were trying to warn them." The woman was asked to walk the trail again. Not immediately. Gently, days later, after she'd been medically cleared. They hoped muscle memory might succeed where language failed. She agreed without protest. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask about him. As they approached the ravine, her pace slowed. 10 feet from the trees, she stopped. Her breathing changed. Shallow, controlled, deliberate. She raised one hand slightly, palm open, as if signaling herself rather than anyone else. When a ranger asked what she was feeling, she shook her head once. Not no. Never. They didn't push her further. That night, one of the rangers reviewing the initial reports noticed something odd about the campsite photos. The sleeping bags had been rolled separately, one tighter than the other. The looser one showed signs of being used last. The tighter one didn't. It suggested someone hadn't slept there, or hadn't needed to. When investigators asked her about the last night, she finally reacted. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes flicked upward. For a brief second, it looked like she might speak. Then, the moment passed, and her expression flattened again, as if the effort itself had cost too much. The official theory leaned toward a fall, accidental separation, poor visibility, panic. Appalachia's dense forest swallowed people quietly. The explanation satisfied paperwork, if not instinct, but the woman never corrected it. She never confirmed it. She never denied it. She returned home weeks later under the care of family. She complied with therapy. Learned to navigate daily routines again. But there were changes no one could map. She avoided forests entirely. Slept with lights on. Left radios playing low static through the night, as if silence had become dangerous. Once, during a session, a therapist asked her to write his name. She stared at the paper for a long time, then turned it over, and pushed it back. Whatever happened in the Appalachian Mountains hadn't just taken him. It had taken the part of her that knew how to describe absence. The case stalled quietly. Not with an announcement. Not with a declaration of defeat. It simply lost momentum, the way unresolved things often do when they refuse to fit into familiar shapes. Search efforts tapered. Weather shifted. Leaves fell and covered the ground, rearranging the forest until even the memory of footprints felt unreliable. The woman returned to a life that looked intact from the outside. Friends spoke softly around her, as if volume alone might break something. Family filled silences with practical questions. Doctors praised her progress. She nodded when expected, smiled when prompted, learned how to pass through conversations without ever truly entering them. What she didn't do was grieve. There was no visible arc of loss, no collapse, no anger, just a careful distance from anything that required language. It unsettled people more than tears would have. Grief was at least recognizable. This wasn't. At night, she dreamed. Not of him, never of him, but of walking beside something that kept pace without sound. In the dreams, the forest wasn't dark. It was attentive. Every tree felt aware. Every step felt measured, as if the ground itself were counting. She woke before dawn most days, heart steady, breath controlled, unable to explain why sleep no longer felt like rest. Investigators tried once more. They reviewed their timeline, looking for human explanations they might have missed. Stress fractures, Relationship conflict. An argument that ended badly. But friends described the couple the same way: quiet, aligned, unremarkable in their stability. No warning signs. No history of volatility. They hiked because it calmed them, not because they were chasing anything. That detail stuck with one of the rangers. Calm, he noted, was not the same as unobservant. On a late afternoon patrol, months after the disappearance, that same ranger returned to the ravine alone, not officially, just to look. The place felt unchanged. No markers, no disturbance. But the longer he stood there, the more aware he became of sound behaving oddly. His own breathing seemed delayed, as if it were echoing inside something that hadn't finished listening yet. He left sooner than planned. Weeks later, a hiker reported finding something strange nearby. Not a body, not clothing, a boot, just one. It was upright, placed carefully against a tree, laces tucked inside. Clean, no rot, no animal damage. It matched the brand and size her partner had worn. There were no tracks around it. No indication of how it arrived there, or how long it had been waiting. The ranger who logged the item felt a familiar hesitation. He wrote the report anyway. When they showed her the photograph, she didn't recoil. She leaned forward. Her fingers traced the outline of the image without touching it, stopping just short of the toe. For the first time since the mountains, her face showed something other than emptiness. Recognition. Then fear. She pushed the photo away and stood up abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. Her breathing quickened. But she still didn't speak. She shook her head again and again, as if refusing something that had just been offered back to her. That night, for the first time, she screamed in her sleep. Just once, a single sound, sharp, startled, like someone realizing too late that they had answered something they shouldn't have. In the Appalachian Mountains, the ravine remained open to hikers. Most passed it without slowing. A few felt uneasy and didn't know why. And one place, small and unmarked, continued to hold the shape of a moment where two people had stood together. And only one had been allowed to leave. The boot was returned to the evidence locker. No announcement was made. No press release followed. One item, found too late and too clean to rewrite the ending, was quietly absorbed into a case that no longer had the energy to resist ambiguity. After that, the woman stopped attending therapy. Not abruptly, not defiantly. She simply began missing appointments, then stopped answering calls. When someone finally reached her, she apologized in a voice that sounded practiced and said she was fine. Better than before. She said talking wasn't helping anymore. That was true, in a way no one else could understand. Words were built to describe things that stayed in place. What she carried now did not. She moved apartments soon after. Nothing drastic, just far enough to break routines. She chose a place near a river, where sound was constant and directional, where silence never gathered long enough to feel intentional. At night, she left the windows open even in the cold, letting water fill the space where thoughts used to form. People noticed changes. She no longer reacted when his name was mentioned in the past tense, or the present. It didn't register as something incorrect. It registered as something incomplete. As if the sentence itself had stopped short of where meaning should have been. Once, a friend asked her directly what happened in the mountains. The woman stared at her for a long moment, eyes unfocused, then said something she would later claim not to remember saying. "He didn't go missing," she said. "He stayed." The friend laughed nervously, waiting for more. Nothing came. Back in the Appalachians, rangers logged a handful of unrelated reports. Hikers feeling watched. A sense of being followed without sound. A couple who turned back from a trail because they felt as if someone was walking just out of sight. Matching their pace exactly. None of it met criteria for escalation. None of it was unusual enough to act on. Except for one detail. Every report referenced the same stretch of land. The ravine. In late autumn, after the first frost but before snow, a maintenance crew cleared debris from a nearby trail. One of them found markings on a tree, just beyond the usual path. Not scratches. Not initials. Something pressed into the bark, shallow but deliberate, as if made by a hand that didn't need tools. The shape meant nothing to them. But when photographed and sent up the chain, an older ranger recognized it immediately. It matched a symbol found in an archived journal from decades earlier. Notes from a hiker who had vanished in the same region in the 1970s. His writing ended mid-page with a single sentence underlined twice. It doesn't take everyone. That file had been dismissed as stress-induced rambling. Now, it was pulled again. When winter finally sealed the mountains, the woman stood at her river window and felt something shift. Not a call. Not an urge. Just a loosening. As if whatever tension had held since the day she walked out of the forest had finally decided it didn't need her attention anymore. She slept through the night for the first time in months. In the Appalachian Mountains, snow covered the ravine completely, smoothing it into something harmless-looking. Trails closed. Signs were removed. Silence returned to its deeper, older state. And somewhere beneath that silence, something that had once divided two people settled back into patience. Waiting not for footsteps, but for understanding. The following spring, the woman returned to the mountains. Not to the ravine, not to the trail where everything had broken apart. She told people she needed closure, but that wasn't true. Closure implied an ending, and she had begun to understand there hadn't been one. Just a separation that never resolved. She stayed on the edge of the range, in a town that lived off hikers passing through. From her window, she could see the tree line rise and fall like a breathing thing. She didn't hike. She didn't enter the forest. She only watched. That was enough. At first, nothing happened. Days passed quietly. People came and went. Spring rain softened the ground. Life moved forward, in the careless way it always does, when it isn't the one being questioned. She began to think maybe the pull had weakened. Maybe whatever had stayed behind no longer needed her awareness to exist. Then, one evening, while walking along the river near town, she stopped. Not abruptly, just paused. The sensation was familiar. The same internal breaking she'd felt at the ravine months earlier. Her body recognized it before her mind could intervene. She listened to the water, the wind, the distant hum of insects, and beneath it all, something else. A pressure. Not sound. Not a voice. A presence that didn't ask her to come closer, only to notice it had always been there. She whispered his name. The word felt strange in her mouth, unused but intact. Saying it didn't hurt the way she'd expected. It didn't summon grief or panic. It summoned understanding. He hadn't been taken. He had been answered. The realization didn't come as terror. It came as a quiet settling, like a piece finally locking into place. The forest hadn't chosen him at random. It hadn't punished them. It had simply recognized something in him that was willing to remain when most people moved on. And she had been allowed to leave because she was not. That truth was harder to carry than any imagined violence. She went home that night and slept deeply. No dreams. No sudden waking. Just rest. The next morning, she packed her things and left town without returning to the river. She didn't feel watched. She didn't feel followed. The tension that had defined her since the mountains finally loosened its grip. Back at the ranger station months later, a seasonal worker logged a minor report. Nothing alarming, just a hiker who claimed he'd felt an overwhelming urge to stop near a ravine and sit down. Not from exhaustion, but from certainty. He said it felt like the place was complete, as if whatever needed to happen there already had. The report was filed. No action required. The woman never returned to the Appalachians again. She lived a quieter life. Ordinary, intact. But sometimes, when people asked about her past, she hesitated. Not because it hurt, but because she wasn't sure how to explain that some endings don't involve loss. Only division. In the mountains, seasons continued to pass. Trees grew thicker. Trails shifted slightly. The ravine remained unmarked. Unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what to feel for. And somewhere within that ancient landscape, something that had once separated two people remained at rest. Not hungry, not waiting. Simply present. The epilogue came quietly. No new reports. No sudden discoveries. Just a shift in how the story was remembered. Not by officials or records, but by the people who had brushed against it and carried something away without knowing its name. Years later, a new ranger stood at the edge of the same ravine. He hadn't been assigned there. He'd wandered slightly off route while checking trail markers, following a feeling he would later struggle to justify. The place looked ordinary. Trees, leaf litter, a gentle drop in the land that didn't announce itself as dangerous. He felt nothing dramatic. No fear, no awe. Just a sense that something had already finished. He stayed only a moment, long enough to notice that the forest here didn't echo the way it did elsewhere. Sounds arrived and ended cleanly, as if the space had no interest in holding on to them. He marked the trail correctly and moved on, never mentioning the pause to anyone. That same year, the woman married someone new. Not because she was replacing anything. Not because she had healed in the way people expect healing to look. She married because she had learned the difference between attachment and attention. And she chose someone who lived fully in the first, without ever drifting into the second. She never told him the full story. Only that once, long ago, she had walked into a place that asked a question she wasn't meant to answer. He accepted that without curiosity, which mattered more than understanding. Sometimes late at night, she dreamed of trees moving in wind that didn't touch her skin. In those dreams, she felt no pull, no separation. Just distance, vast, calm, and complete. She woke rested, as if something had watched over the boundary and found it intact. In the Appalachian Mountains, hikers continued to pass through. Most never noticed the ravine. Some slowed briefly and didn't know why. A very few stopped, listened, and felt a quiet certainty that there was nothing more for them there, and walked on without regret. No one vanished again, and that was the truest ending of all. Not because the mountains had changed, but because the moment had closed. Whatever had once required recognition had been seen, had been answered, and no longer needed to divide anyone else to remain. The forest returned to being what it had always been. Old, patient, uninterested in human meaning. And the silence that lingered, there was no longer waiting. It was simply whole. the story didn't end for everyone at the same time. Years after the case had slipped fully into obscurity, a linguistics researcher studying regional folklore passed through a small Appalachian town near the old trail system. She wasn't looking for disappearances. Her work focused on how people described landscapes, the words they used when places felt alive, without ever saying so directly. In a diner, she overheard an old man telling a younger hiker, "Some hollers don't echo back." He said it casually, like weather advice. The phrase stayed with her. She asked around, quietly. Not about missing people, but about places locals avoided without explanation. The answers overlapped more than she expected. A ravine. A dip in the land. A place where couples argued less, spoke less, sometimes stopped walking altogether. One woman said, "It's not bad. It's just already occupied." That wording made it into the researcher's notes. Later, reviewing old park records, she found the case file. 2 names, 1 return, 1 silence. No conclusion that satisfied language. The absence wasn't described as violence or loss, only as separation. That, she realized, was the anomaly. Most disappearance stories end in fear. This one ended in quiet. She visited the area once, on a clear afternoon. She stayed on the trail. She didn't approach the ravine. She felt no pull, only a strange sense of completion, like walking into a room after a conversation has already ended. She left without taking photographs. In her published paper years later, there was a single line, buried deep in the analysis, easy to overlook. Some environments do not remove people. They redistribute attention. No one connected it to the case. Back in her ordinary life, the woman, the one who had returned, sometimes caught herself standing still in crowded places. Airports, malls, busy streets. For a split second, the world would quiet, not because it had gone silent, but because she no longer needed to listen for anything beneath it. She had learned what it felt like when a boundary closed, not slammed shut, sealed. In the Appalachian Mountains, the ravine eroded slowly. Rain softened its edges. Roots broke through old soil. In another century, it would disappear entirely, leaving nothing that suggested it had ever divided 2 lives. But even when it was gone, the moment would remain. Not as a warning, not as a legend, but as a completed exchange. One that asked nothing more. And that was why no one else vanished there. Not because the mountains had mercy, but because whatever once needed answering had already been answered. Nothing followed after that. No new reports, no late discoveries, no second story to reopen the first. The mountains, having finished whatever quiet transaction had once required attention, offered no epilogues of their own. Time did what it always does best. It diluted significance. The trail was rerouted slightly years later, not because of the ravine, but because erosion made maintenance inefficient. A curve was softened. A marker moved a few yards east. Hikers adjusted without noticing, stepping around a place that no longer aligned with anything memorable. The woman aged. Not dramatically, just enough to feel the seasons pass through her, instead of around her. She built a life measured by ordinary things, routines, obligations, shared mornings. She laughed easily, slept deeply. When people spoke about fate or destiny, she listened with polite detachment, knowing how easily those words inflated experiences that were never meant to be explained. Sometimes she stood very still. Not often, just in moments when noise layered too thickly. Crowded rooms, overlapping voices, places where attention scattered in every direction at once. In those moments, she remembered what it felt like when attention narrowed to a single point and everything else fell away. She never missed it, because she understood now that not every door was meant to be opened. And not every opening was an invitation. The Appalachian Mountains continued their slow transformations. Trees fell, others rose. Trails shifted with human convenience and natural indifference. The land did not remember the couple the way people remember. But memory isn't the same as imprint. Somewhere beneath the soil that had once held two sets of footprints, something remained balanced, not active, not dormant, simply resolved. Like a note held long enough to finish itself. Visitors came and went. Most felt nothing. A few paused without knowing why, then continued on with a faint sense of relief they never questioned. And that was the final truth of it. The disappearance was not a warning. The silence was not a threat. The return was not a mercy. It was a boundary, briefly visible, briefly crossed, and then closed.